Wednesday night, and welcome to another Undressed podcast. I'm Jeremy Taylor, and welcome to Wednesday Night Undressed, or even Wednesday Night Harassed and Undressed, the podcast that reaches into the wobbly places that other podcasts dare and venture. Join our panel for a thrilling threnody of rumbustical debate, where the answers are always clear, simple, and straightforward, usually. Our team tonight, just Josh. Kathleen's with us.
Hi.
Evo's here. Lauren Snow's with us. Our producer is now Rasmussen, and we mustn't forget to be introduced in that voice that everybody except me understands and recognizes. Dr. Orlando.
Hello there, children.
Okay, so look. Who is this person that you're doing Hello There, Children?
That
I
is
just need
Chef
to know.
from South Park.
You're not from around here, are you?
We get questions from the excuse me. Oh, it's going to be one of those, is it, tonight? Oh dear. Right. We get questions from the team and the audience. I, being British, am neither ancient or a baby, but I would like to know, by way of edification, what is thought in today's world to be ancient? And then the question, of course, is for the ancients, which is the best band, Stones or the Beatles? And for the babies, better act, Migos or Drake, which I
Migos.
assume is some sort of Greek duck.
Migos.
Is it a Greek duck dish or something?
No, it's a hip hop act.
Well, yes. Anyway, so let's do band Stones or the Beatles. It's a ridiculous question. I didn't put this question. Someone bought it for us. But Stones or the Beatles?
Well, the answer is obviously the Stones.
The Beatles.
Uh-oh.
I think most people would agree that the Stones actually were better musicians and a better band, but the Beatles had a huge impact on the world.
See, I go the other way. I go that the Beatles were actually a better band. Better musicians, but the Stones are the best band.
Oh.
You know-
Okay. Well, you're just wrong, but other than that, thank you.
First of all, I want to bring back the Super Bowl in Indianapolis, where, no, it wasn't Indianapolis, it was the one before that, where the Rolling Stones were the act at halftime. Mm-hmm. And I was enraged because, believe it or not, the organizers of the show, the producers, demanded that the people that were going to spill from the stands onto the field around the stage, they had to be under the age of 40. So the people for the filming of the show that were making noise around the stage had to be under the age of 40.
Oh,
you
that's
have the
crappy.
audacity
Yeah.
with these four relics on the fucking stage. Charlie Watts, I want to know, how is Charlie Watts still playing drums, obviously at least 10 years after he died? It is freaking ridiculous. Also,
Well, he's a
these
robot,
guys,
isn't he?
their combined age is 248 years old, and they have the audacity to ask the audience to be under the age of 40. They don't know who the fucking Rolling Stones are.
Hold on. How old were you when that Super Bowl happened?
No, I was like maybe 42, 43.
Okay, that's all. Keep going.
But no, I don't care. I don't want to be there. But anyway, also Rolling Stones have long ceased to be a band. They're a corporation. Mm-hmm. You know, they are selling lunch boxes with the tongue and all this bullshit. You know, and also you guys are restricting the age of the audience. These guys don't go to the museum anymore because if they try to leave, the alarm will go off. I mean, it's freaking unbelievable. Their tattoos are considered cave art. Scientists study their tattoos seriously, and you're talking about the audience being under the age of 40. Shut the hell up. Rolling Stones were better showmen. Obviously, Mick Jagger is a guy that can jump around on stage.
I love the way he says Mick Jagger.
Mick Jagger. Yeah.
Can you say aluminum for us there, Jeremy?
Aluminium. And then Keith Richards is a wonder. I mean, not as a musician because he plays the same two chords, but he's a miracle because he has basically abused every imaginable drug. Everything from heroin to kitchen bleach, he has injected into his veins.
You really
Then
love
he-
the Stones, don't you?
Have you ever heard Bill Hicks's bit on Keith Richards, where he says Keith Richards fell off the edge and hit the ledge?
That's good. I remember when he fell off a tree in Australia. Remember when Keith Richards, for some reason, at the age of 72, was on top of a tree in Australia. Why the fuck was this elderly man
Heroin?
on top of a tree in Australia? He falls from the top of the tree, something like 30 feet, hits a couple of branches, lands down on the ground, dusts himself off, and keeps on going. And at this point, I was thinking, okay, you know how they make the black boxes on airplanes from alloy containing titanium? They should just make the black boxes out of Keith Richards. This guy's completely indestructible. The fuck, he will never die. This guy's incredible. I mean,
So you admire
Isn't
him a
he
lot.
Captain Jack's dad?
David Bowie fucking died. He was a picture of health, you know.
Isn't he-
Freaking Tom Petty died. This guy keeps on living. You know?
Isn't he,
Picture
isn't he
of
Captain
health,
Jack's
except for,
dad?
You know, having
Yeah.
lung cancer.
Captain Jack
But,
Sparrow,
okay.
isn't he Captain Jack Sparrow's dad?
Yeah. That
The
was good
reality
casting.
is that the Beatles have been going longer than the Stones, and I think that they're technically 2 years. Yeah, they're technically more proficient.
Beatles haven't been going
There's
since
only
the
one
70s.
left.
What are you talking
Does
about?
Ringo Starr really?
Yeah, but their music
true
is
statement.
still having an impact
Yeah, but
He's saying that Paul McCartney
on
still
the youth.
performs.
That's a
Yeah.
good point.
And
Lauren.
Ringo Starr still pretends to be performing. The other two are gone. You know,
Don't you
they
be
didn't
talking
make
about
it.
my friend
Gone,
Ringo.
you mean dead as fuck?
That is fuck. You know, whereas the Rolling Stones, they're fucking Charlie Watts, man. What is this? Like, it's an exact carbon copy of Amenhotep's mummy. You know, and he's fucking playing the drums.
Obviously, Evo's never been on amphetamines.
But I like the Beatles because I think they're better composers
Yeah.
than the Rolling. They compose hooks. It's so hard to make a song that stucks in your mind and is there forever. And they created those hooks with such ease. They're seamless melodies and they're simple, like they said themselves, simple love songs. You know, silly love songs. But they're so good because they've proven it. It's very, very hard to create a hook. There's a lot of one-hit wonders. They created one hook, and that's it. Beatles, almost every album, they had like 3 or 4. The Rolling Stones have about 5. I want to say, and I know you love them, but obviously I can get no satisfaction. Time
which is
is on
technically
your,
not theirs. That's actually Otis Redding's. But yeah.
really. She's time is on your side. I like Angie and Wild Horses. And I can't, Jumping Jack Flash is memorable. It's not a great composition, but it's in your head. You can't get rid of it, right? What else?
Sympathy for the Devil?
That's a great one. That's a great one. That's my favorite one. Yeah,
That song.
that's my favorite one.
And the history that created that song is,
That might be their
in
best.
just alone, that song is way better than any Beatles song. Just on that composition alone of like coming up with that narrative, that narrative alone, being the devil, all the terrible things, all the history that went involved in writing that song. I mean, that is a story.
Yeah,
And I don't
you say
necessarily-
that though, but coming up with "I Want to Hold Your Hand" or "She Loves You" or something like that, right at the beginning, right?
I mean, I could fucking write "I Want to Hold Your Hand."
No, you
like,
couldn't.
give
But
me,
Not at the
but
time.
I did.
you
But,
couldn't.
but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like every era has that band that has that song. Whether it was the Beatles first, or Boys to Men, or New Kids on the Block, or whatever boy band, they all have the same song.
Kids on the Block was never a
the
thing.
thing.
But the boy bands, they
But
had
the
one
thing
song.
is
That was not a
that
thing.
what created good music out of the Beatles was acid. And if you put
Amen.
Not
if you
until
put
their last
if you
couple
put
of albums.
the headphones on,
Uh-huh.
and I haven't smoked weed in a long time,
Like
and you
since
smoke
yesterday.
some weed,
Same though.
the things you will hear in that music is fantastic. But anything before that is not.
They were a boy
No.
band. No, I agree 100%.
It's not really like anything spectacular. Like,
I think-
it's spectacular because it was new and inventive for the time. It's like the fucking car, right? Like, wow, it's a car,
It
and
looks-
and you're like, great that it's a car, but it's not anything special.
It looks very simple. A lot of things are not don't appear to be anything special. The Moonlight Sonata is one of the simplest melodies ever created. As a composition, extremely simple. The Bolero is nothing, but they are timeless, and it's extremely hard to come up with a simple melody that stays with you and touches you. If you think about the Beatles, boy bands have one or two hits. They had fucking Let It Be, Michelle, Girl,
Jude. Hey Jude.
Hey Jude.
Hey Jude.
It
I
almost
sang
it
Get that
just,
out of your mind after you've thought about it for a
come
while.
together.
Penny
They-
Lane.
I sang Let It Be in 8th grade. I love that song.
Help. There were so many hits, hit after hit after hit after hit after hit. So it's very
Yes.
hard. Rolling Stones produced 50 albums. They came up with more than 50 albums. They have maybe 5 or 6 memorable songs. A lot of their stuff is junk, you know.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
and there was nothing else other than the Stones and the Beatles at the time, so there was no competition for them either. And as rock and roll grew, more competition came out of it. And real rock and roll isn't the Beatles. It's angst and talking about where you're coming from and powerful music from that heart.
Yeah.
People wrote their music. I don't care what
I
they
think
say.
you'd be
Somebody
very.
else wrote their
I
music.
think you'd be very
You think
surprised.
somebody
They
else
did
wrote
not.
Beatles music?
I think you would be very surprised if you looked at some of the lead guitarists from the big rock bands as to what they were doing in 1965 and 1968. In those years, they may not have been in Cream or something like that then, but they were doing session music, working on famous songs.
Of course they were. They were working on the Beatles songs.
Very often, in fact. Yeah.
And then they created their own bands because they realized that they could write their own shit.
Clapton's
Yeah, exactly.
a good example.
One of the probably best guitarist of all time.
So, like the I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you before because I think you're about to answer the question I want to ask. Like, we have had this discussion now for like 5 minutes, and there seems to be this argument over whether or not the Beatles were the better band because they were the better composers, or the Stones were the better band because they were the better showmen. Is that fair?
The Beatles were the better band because they had a better manager. And they got produced
Which
and put
ones
out
were
there.
the better musicians?
Stones, for sure.
See, I don't know. I genuinely think that Beatles might be better. I'm sorry, I have ignored you for far too long. Go ahead.
Okay, first off, the fact that the Beatles ended like at the very beginning of the 70s and their music is still played on the radio. It is still quoted to this day. It is still being used in movies and TV shows. And people, my freaking nursery was designed after John Lennon's Imagine album. You cannot tell me shit.
That explains so much.
You cannot tell me that the fucking Rolling Stones are better than the Beatles. They have the reason they're still literally the only reason they are still relevant is because they haven't stopped.
Well, we should point out that the question was better band, Stones or the Beatles. That was the
Beatles.
question. It isn't going into, well, what about Led Zeppelin or
Yeah.
Led
Zeppelin are the best.
Glenn Miller.
That's
For
why I
exa-
excluded them.
for example, if my father was here right now, he'd be going, well, when I was in my teens and 20s and 30s and 40s, I was thinking Glenn Miller and the Beatles. It's very interesting how our thinking is different in different generations. So me growing up, I grew up with some Beatles, lots of heavy rock, and disco. And you don't hear disco
Apparently some
anymore.
Glenn Miller, who was great.
I loved Glenn Miller as
Great.
a kid. Pennsylvania 65000 is still one of my absolute favorite songs of all time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But Led Zeppelin are amazing because I think that's the only band that doesn't have a bad song. I don't know how they did it. 10 albums, every song's a freaking masterpiece.
Yep.
They're like Linda Lovelace. They don't have a bad hit.
Because the two musicians in the band, the guitarist and keyboard player or bass, were professional session musicians beforehand.
More than that.
Bonzo, however, was I don't know what the word is, a savant or something.
Oh my God.
He was amazing.
Yeah. John Paul Jones was amazing too.
Yeah,
Jimmy
But you
Page.
didn't ask about Zeppelin. Like I
I
researched this
excluded-
question.
I excluded
because I was
Zeppelin.
like, oh, are we talking about these two bands or the time period?
No.
Or whatever. Because I could have gone into the Kinks.
No,
or
see,
the
that's the
Ramones.
beauty of this question
Yeah.
for me. Like,
Real
you're
good
not a
music.
you're
bands
not
like Death, for instance.
You're just
Or
you're
Sabbath.
just trolling now.
No.
Sabbath.
Death.
I don't know Death. I know. No.
Oh,
They
so
were the grandparents of the Ramones. They were the very first band out of Chicago to do what you think of music
punk.
as the Ramones.
See, I think
Yes.
the Kinks are the. See, I really think the Kinks are the first to do it.
The Kinks were just a '60s band.
No, the Kinks were the Kinks and Iggy Pop and the Stooges were the ones that really started to push that envelope into a different era, and that's my opinion.
This is like a conversation
Yeah.
that we need to separate in several parts and maybe continue next time with two different bands. Have like a March Madness, eliminate.
Oh, we could have like
eliminate one band every
Oh, we could have like a
I'm
ballad.
eliminating the Stones right now.
bracket.
bracket of bands.
Do we need a final vote on this? Which of these two were the better band? Beatles, everybody? Or
I don't know.
Rolling Stones?
Beatles
I
won.
didn't vote
And
for
one
any.
abstention. Oh,
I don't know what to
dear.
do.
3-2.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on.
Stones are more entertaining.
All idiots.
I'm moving on in a particular way.
Okay.
Okay. The Nation, thinking of Stephen Colbert Co. In fact, nations tend not to hold national holidays for wars or civil wars held in or prior to 1900. Does the president's recent behavior, tell us that it's time to move on from Remembrance Day holidays? I'm particularly interested in what Lauren's got to say about this.
First
Because
off,
you don't remember the Vietnam War. You may, I don't know if you were around for the Iraqi War, were you?
First one?
The first Iraq War?
No, the first one, but the
So
second
what I'm
one.
getting at is that when I was a kid,
During the Civil War,
there
yeah.
were people who still remembered the Boer War, right? So I remember the old men marching from the First War in the Cenotaph in London. They're all gone now. There's nobody alive from the First War who served in the First War. So I'm interested to, Trump just didn't think it was, whatever.
pertinent. Yeah.
Does there come a time when November the 11th, 11 o'clock on November the 11th, ceases to be relevant anymore because it's a war that was 100 years ago?
But it's called World War One.
No, it wasn't. It was called the Great War. And then it
That's
was
even better.
renamed.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Do you think that there's any point in having a remembrance for these ancient wars?
yes. Yes, I do. Because I believe we should still remember this because these are still people. These are still people who gave their lives for this war. And this also saying, like, maybe he's telling us we should move on. You are giving Trump way too much fucking credit on that front. Because he's a moron who's just fucking stupid and doesn't know how a goddamn umbrella works.
Yeah.
True that.
Well, it's an intricate come over. Rain it can be devastating.
Horsehair tends to smell when it's wet. But I'm sorry, I still think this should be talked about because I believe we shouldn't ever just stop remembering any part of our history or stop celebrating any part of our history because those are still lives.
Right.
Those are still lives that were lost. Those were still people who fought for what they believed in. And if you're just gonna stop celebrating it, like history like doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. and just forgetting, like just not celebrating or remembering what happened, it leads to that rhyming.
It's very
what
interesting what
happens.
Lauren says is because the guys who were conscripted both in America and the UK and in Germany and other places, you know, they didn't give their lives. That's always, I've never liked that phrase, but they very often got shot. They were in a huge amount of pain, screaming for their mothers usually, and to die that way, horrible. And what would they want? Well, they would want to be able to go home and not die, but assuming they're going to, they simply want to be remembered. And very often they're not remembered. And I think that's what's important. The deal was the 11th hour of the 11th day, you know, of the 11th month. And I get pissed because people say, oh, great, it's a holiday, let's go to the lake, you know, or whatever they do. It used to be that the trains would stop, the cars would stop, stores would shut the tills down for a little while, and it was, hey, just take a minute, you know. And my generation remember the guys who died in Vietnam. You know, I can't remember names, but I do. I can visualize a guy who died in Vietnam.
Yeah.
So you raised... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ivo.
Yeah. I prefer guys who don't get killed during war.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Quote.
amazing the coincidence that I just came back from the World War I Memorial Museum in Kansas City. And it's the only museum dedicated to World War I in the United States. And it was extremely inspiring and humbling. I've been there before, but they've done an amazing job with this museum. There's 9,000 puppies, puppy flowers. You've seen it, right?
Yeah,
Each one
puppy,
represents
yeah.
1,000 lives lost by American soldiers in the First War. And so we've given almost 1 million lives. But it's very sombering when you go in, and there's a big chart that takes an entire wall that tells you how many people have died. And we're talking millions and millions and millions of people from all over the world. And we can't forget a war like this. It's not just any war. We're talking about millions upon millions of people dying in the span of 3.5, 4 years. Also, something that Jeremy said that was extremely important. As I was walking through the museum, it's impossible not to notice the exhibits that depict the medical services, the nurses and the doctors that were there, and what they were using. We were advanced enough as a civilization to kill with relatively advanced weapons that were horrific, including chemical weapons. Fritz Haber, but our medicine was not advanced enough. There was a contradiction between the way we killed and the way we cured. Antibiotics were not there yet.
Although
Plastic surgery wasn't there yet.
we want to go to Lewis. One interesting thing is the ladies listening. You know, most ladies who listen to this have at some point in their life used a tampon. A direct result from the First War was tampons because of the type the bandages they were using. They had a special. It was the first type of absorbent, and men were bringing these things back in their kit. It just came home, and women started to use those bandages, and that's where tampons came from.
Well, that puts an end to the conversation. We should celebrate this for forever and ever.
Dr. Orlando.
Yeah.
So I'm going to advance an alternative idea. I found what you said, Jeremy, particularly interesting because you described a time when we had ostensibly a mainstream culture. Like there was essentially one group of people that kind of decided how the country should act. And starting right around the Vietnam War era, we moved away from that. Like you had people that were protesting the war. So I'm guessing, I don't know this for sure, but I'm guessing that there is a contingent of America that would actually rather not have a day of remembrance for the war. I'm not sure if that's good or bad.
I'm not sure that that's true or not.
I'm not sure either.
I don't know.
I'm not sure either.
It's a point of pretty good unanimity around the country that you want to honor our sacrifices
We
in
celebrate
past
the
wars.
end
So
of war.
this is
Yes.
what I
The
think.
end of a war.
This is what I think is different, though. I think that it is the commander-in-chief's responsibility to remember the war. I am not entirely sure that we as I'm going to say this differently. I am absolutely sure that we as a country have decided that we don't want to engage in a mass remembrance ceremony because we don't do it. But we have this expectation that the folks that are in the military are going to honor the traditions of the folks that come before them. And what is so offensive about what our president just did is that he shirked his responsibility as commander-in-chief. He basically slapped the men and women that died for all of the previous wars.
He's
in
getting
the face.
pretty much universal condemnation for his
Yeah.
behavior.
Oh,
in the last
no,
few days.
no.
Civil
If you
War.
watch Fox News, you will never hear about it. You don't know that happened.
Yeah.
You wouldn't know.
Really?
It's chamber.
I avoided
And the
listening
reason
to
that I started with that premise is I'm trying to reconcile exactly what Jeremy said. There absolutely was a time where businesses would shut down, where people had this understanding that this is what you are supposed to do. But I feel like as a country, since we figured out that we don't have to all do the same thing, we don't. And so,
Well, in Josh is going to come in, and I'll say something.
I guess I'm confused by the question. Are we asking about
Whether we should celebrate.
celebrate the Great War?
Yes.
Or Veterans Day?
No,
No.
the Great War. The armistice.
November 11th.
Well, the
Right.
The
okay,
end
so
of the Great War.
the American president decided to change November the 11th, and they wanted to call it Veterans Day. It was originally called Armistice Day.
Right.
But in general terms, the Allied countries had chosen that day, and then that day went on to become the day that one remembered, not
Correct.
celebrated. You don't celebrate war, you remember it.
Correct.
And I think that one of the things that this country doesn't do, and the UK doesn't do either, is do the remembering, right? That they don't stop. Hands up who has said to their kids, do you know what day it is today and why it's special?
we say that every 4th of July. What are you talking about?
All right. When the Brits decided to leave. But if you're a school kid in Holland or even in Belgium, many towns in Belgium, you are given a war grave to look after. At a certain age, that year, you get a war grave to look after, and you might well meet the family and so on. And I was doing a lecture literally last week, and a guy came up to me whose brother had been killed flying a bomber during the war. He's buried in Holland. They'd been across to see the grave, and they met the kid who's looking after the grave for that year. And then that kid hands the grave over to another kid. And so for 40 years, or 60, 70 years, whatever it is, that grave's been looked after by school children. So they know, they understand,
So
Dr. Orlando.
When did this country stop assigning civic duties within school? Did this
they-
country ever assign
I don't
civic
think they did,
duties
did they?
in
Well,
school?
They don't even assign civic study anymore.
So there's so many parts to this question
There
that
are, I agree.
where I think we're missing a crucial piece is the Great War. There's only been a few wars on our soil, so I think it's very hard for us to remember something that didn't happen here. Like I think we tend to.
That's true.
We tend to that's great, but
Something happened.
We
over
have a
there.
different
Yeah.
connection to both wars,
Yeah.
me and Jeremy.
I think
Yeah.
that's a piece of it, and what we do. I think as society, what we do with holidays. I mean, it used to be that no one did anything on Christmas. I mean, it was closed, and now Walgreens and things are open on Christmas. We start to just put those days to some people.
That's my point.
Yep, exactly. Some people remember that, but if you choose to, great. If you choose to not, great. I mean, I think that's the American kind of way that we
But I
choose
think
to do
that's
things.
the current American way. I think you're right, but I think that this is something that is younger than Jeremy. I don't necessarily think it's younger than me.
Well, I wouldn't know because I don't know what was open and closed when Jeremy in the United States in 1970 compared to now. Like, I just don't. I would have to ask
back
my
to
dad.
the specific question, which was, this is over 100 years ago now, the end of the First World War, and countries generally don't commemorate specific events over 100 years before. I can see this country saying, right, Veterans Day is something different from commemoration of the end of World War II, and Memorial Day is going to cover all those war-type things.
I tell you what,
I can see that happening.
I can see, and I wonder if I would support it. I might support it if they change Veterans Day and make it on 9/11. If there's going to be more of an emotional connection by this generation to something like this, change it to 9/11 and do away with the Great War. But I feel like people are more connected to 9/11 viscerally, emotionally, and in terms of memory and knowing people that, it's just it's not even one generation removed. So I feel like people would be more emotional and more dedicated to this holiday if they move it to 9/11.
When we first came here, I was asked to give a talk, which wouldn't have been very long after 9/11, a year or two at the most, and I wasn't quite sure what to say to the Americans. I'd not been here before, so it was like 3 days into my first visit to America. And I was talking to my mother, who had obviously gone through the Second World War, and I said, what do you think I should tell them? And she responded immediately, without thinking about it, tell them that now they know how we felt about the attack in New York.
Almost every day.
Yeah, tell them now they know how we felt.
Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, so it's the 70s, and I'm playing around the city and going into buildings and stuff, backyards. There were ruins from bombings during World War II. We had buildings that were missing parts of the building and stuff, and I would ask what happened, and they'd say it's the bombing. And, October 2nd, 1942 or something, and so we have kind of a connection. The wounds are there, and you can, obviously we can't barely see them anymore, but it's different when you have a connection like this.
Anybody who comes to our house and uses the downstairs lavatory, you will see a picture of my grandfather showing the late king around one of the war graves that he designed.
God. I thought you were going to say you would see the damages from, the sea crater.
Oh, we hid those, yeah. Lauren had something to say on this.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, Lauren.
With the whole, it happened, like it ended over 100 years ago, and so we shouldn't celebrate anymore. Are we going to set that precedent for every war after the World War II has been over for over 100 years? Are we just gonna forget it happened?
I don't think it's a...
Then we'll have World War III and World War IV to
acknowledge
commemorate.
this happened anymore, and we're not
Emperor
gonna.
Trump won't let that happen.
We're not gonna acknowledge all the people who died.
Yeah.
Well,
If you're gonna say we should just stop thinking about wars.
I'm not sure
at a
that...
certain point-
America doesn't have a Civil War Day, does it? There isn't a day that commemorates the fallen in the Civil War, or,
No, not really.
That's interesting, but
Actually,
4th of July
Memorial
is
Day
kind of like
started
that.
as sort of a...
Not Civil War, but...
Yeah, it did actually come out of days after the Civil War. Yeah.
Did it?
They say that Lincoln was the one who did that. But
And I think that there is a difference, though, between a formalized day of remembrance and forgetting about the war. I think that those are two different things.
Our national holiday in Bulgaria is March 3rd, which is the end of a war. So, and that was in the 1800s. And I think it's going to stay forever. We consider Independence Day, so...
Well, let's ask another question. Let's move on.
Let's do that.
Let's move on to another question
Sorry,
that I thought,
correct.
I hit the table.
which I thought was an interesting one for me. Recently, a human being, born as a man but living as a woman, entered and won an athletics race. The woman came second and third, felt that it was unfair for her, the person who won the race. They felt it was unfair on them. What do we think about folk who are trans, particularly folk born as men, competing physically against women? Is this inherently unfair? Who wants to go first?
That's a big question.
I really
huge
don't
question.
think so.
I think so. I think that there's
Try and stay awake, Josh. Come on.
I think
Let's
that
go to
there's
Josh
a.
first.
Females have better lower body strength anyway. So
Okay, you raise a good point. That it may not be inherently unfair.
if it was in weightlifting,
Yeah.
maybe that would be unfair.
I would agree with that. I would say that
But
it depends
in
on the
this-
nature of the competition.
There's
In
so
this
much
specific,
more
no.
to it than that. If you start your transition and the drugs before puberty or after puberty, there are different effects. There are different sizes of muscle mass and the legs, the male. There's so many different questions involved in that. What there recently in March of this year, I think it was, there was a wrestling competition in Texas, where the 52-0, 52 wins, no losses, young lady was women's wrestling, high school, competing against a trans girl who was taking testosterone to become male. And they wouldn't let her compete in the men's wrestling, which is what she wanted to do. She had to compete against the women, and she'd been taking testosterone, so of course she won. Now, that's there's so many different ways you can come at this thing. It's very complicated.
It is. Yeah. What do you think, Josh?
I think for sports alone, if you just take the biology, not the sex biology, but the biology between the difference between men and women in just pure bone density, even before transition, there is a difference.
Really?
And the strength of bones and how they make up males versus females is different. So if you just use that biology, you're gonna the males will have an upper hand
Yeah.
in sports events,
Yeah.
no matter what.
What if the
at that
sports
point.
event is having babies? Yeah.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
So I have a question.
Well, no.
But that's not the
We're
question.
talking about athletics, and you're right. You can change your gender and use hormones and surgery, but the bone structure is not going to change. It will stay there, the center of gravity. The fast twitch muscles are very hard to change as well. You remember Caster Semenya? Caster Semenya, the South African runner.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Castor, he was in here last week, wasn't he?
No,
Was his
it's
brother
it's a
Pollux?
lady. It's a lady, but she was basically a male in terms of hormones. Her endocrine system was basically, she was born that way. So they needed to gender check test to determine whether she would compete or not. And it was kind of dicey. It was kind of close, but she won the gold in the last Olympics in track and field in her discipline. But everybody, it's a little bit controversial because hormonally, she's really a male. So you're right, it's very complicated. One thing I would not do is allow transgender people to compete, like men that transition to female, to compete in martial arts against women. I disagree with having somebody who has been most of his life a male to go in MMA, and it's dangerous. It's just dangerous, and we've seen it actually happen.
Yes, we have.
Same with boxing. I wouldn't do that. Or like you said, probably weightlifting is not very fair either.
But I just felt I read the story. I didn't think about, as Josh had pointed out and Kathleen had pointed out, the sort of technical side of it, the biology of it. It just seemed to me that this woman, who had spent most of her life as a guy,
Yeah.
right, she was probably a foot taller than the girls, and I just thought, I can see it just doesn't seem fair.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to get at is, it didn't seem fair. Technically, it might have been fair.
Yeah.
It might have been PC. Are you trying to wave at us or something,
Yes,
Dr. Orlando?
yes.
Ah,
I have
think
an
Dr. Orlando
alternative
wishes
idea.
to enunciate himself.
And I'm not sure that my idea is well thought out. So if not, please jump on it and beat it to within an inch of its life. Listening to you guys talk, and here's what I'm hearing. Like, it's completely okay for two guys to get into an MMA ring and beat the shit out of each other. But as soon as we add a woman into the mix, this becomes blatantly unfair. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's a rather arbitrary position to take. Like, if you're gonna engage in MMA, you're gonna engage in MMA. Like, we have this binary classification. Like, that's what we humans like to do. We like to say you're either in this group or in this group. And so for purposes of competition, we have found it convenient to say you're either a man or a woman. You either get to compete with the men or you get to compete with the women. And trans people fuck up that dynamic that we have. Maybe
But that's not true. Okay, if you have in high school, even in college sports, even in youth clubs where young ladies wrestle and they have to wrestle against boys.
Yeah.
And they win in high school too.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not this thing where it's different. But when you change
You become
and say that you're something else and doing it, that changes the whole.
That only changes the situation because we have this delineation. If you're a guy, you have to wrestle in this group over here. If you're a girl, you have to wrestle in this group over here. And right now, what we're saying is, if you're a guy, you can't change and wrestle with this group over here because we have this line that says the twain shall never meet. And I'm saying maybe that is our problem as opposed to guys changing their sex to wrestle with women.
It's not an easy subject.
It's pretty easy.
After you've developed
biology, but
after you've developed your body, after you've reached a certain age, your body's developed, you are at an extreme disadvantage if you're a woman versus a man, especially in combat sports, and you're basically defenseless punching bag, and it's extremely dangerous. And I mean, it's obvious that for safety reasons you have to limit this kind of stuff. You can't equalize that.
How you feel about that, Kath?
Well, I don't feel like a defenseless punching bag. I can't talk, but
Yeah.
Look, the whole question has many contradictions. It's not necessarily true that transgender from male to female is always going to be stronger than the women. It's because they're taking the sort of drugs that change their physiology as well. It's way more complicated than that, and there isn't an easy answer. Did you know that, just interesting note, that when they first started gender testing, it was in one of the Olympics. They did no, it wasn't the Olympics. It was one of the World Championships. They decided that they were a little suspicious, so they made all the women parade naked before a panel of women doctors to prove that they were women, and everybody who took that test passed, but six.
Were the doctors required to prove they're women?
No, but six of the athletes, female athletes from one of the Eastern Bloc countries, dropped out mysteriously just before that test was required.
Let me guess, East Germany. Man, I've seen those swimmers. East German swimmers. Jeez, man. The Chinese weightlifters in the Olympics in China.
Steroids.
The female weightlifters. Holy crap,
Steroids.
Man. Their facial hair. And I wouldn't.
Steroids.
Yeah, I had suspicions, but I wouldn't tell them to their face.
I think
I
Josh
sure
is
would,
saying it.
I wouldn't. I would be worried about them hitting me on the head with my car. It's just freaking scary.
We will, in fact, be doing a podcast next week, just before Thanksgiving, which is going to be a lot of fun.
You know what Thanksgiving is?
I have no idea. It's
Something to do with turkey. That's all he knows.
something to do with.
I thought that was American holiday.
No, that's a Turkish holiday.
No, I don't know. I mean, I've never really understood it because, your national
It's
anthem
terrible food, anyways.
has the same music as ours, and the thing about the flag was written on a British warship. I've never. Anyway, we needn't go there. But one question that I do want to give people some thought, get people to give some thought to before we come up with our sponsors for this week, is the best and worst things about winter, leaving aside, of course, Evo's display outside the Castle Dracula.
Yeah.
He has an annual blow-up display, and I'm not talking about dynamite.
Or the ladies.
Or the ladies.
Yes, he likes the blow-up doll, or he does. He does like blowing them up if he gets a moment. But very quick, round robin, best and worst things about winter. Dr. Orlando.
Best thing, sweaters.
Oh,
Worst
that was
thi-
mine.
I'm sorry. Best thing, the snow covering the ground and making everything look as bleak as I feel inside. Worst thing is sweaters.
Best things: sweaters, socks, and fireplaces. Warmth.
Worst thing?
Slush. Oh, and one that I can't decide on, that you have to be nice to everybody in your family. Now, is that a best thing or a worst thing?
That's
Depends whether her name's Barbara or
Oh,
not. Can we make this
Of course,
podcast
this is the best
public?
and worst
There's
things
thousands of
about
people.
winter, not Thanksgiving, but still, it holds.
Uncle Josh.
Chili is the best thing.
Chili is good.
The worst thing is winter.
The worst thing's chili, too. The best thing is chili and the worst thing is chili, too.
The worst thing is the chili once you're done with
Yeah.
it. Yes.
Dr. Evo.
Best thing about winter, so fucking easy, basketball. There's absolutely no contest. Best thing about winter, basketball. I am looking forward winter because of basketball. I love it. I wait for it. I cherish it. Worst thing about winter, fucking coming out of the shower in the morning.
My shower's in the basement.
Dark and freezing outside.
Terrible. Like George Costanza.
You guys need space heaters.
In the shower?
Just right outside.
Yeah.
Don't you want to just stay in it? It's dark outside and you just, oh fuck, I'm not going out.
Mr. Taylor, what about you? Best and worst
Hot
thing?
water.
The best thing for me is the run up to Christmas. The worst thing for me is the day after Christmas.
You don't have to write those damn letters, do you?
Well, when I'm not being made to do other things, we have the tradition of Boxing Day, when we go round and give small trivia to our staff and the retainers on the estate. But you
It
know,
reminds me, one of the worst things about winter is Christmas, yes. We have a kind of slightly opposite view.
I got you.
Yeah.
I love Christmas. I look forward to Christmas. I everything Christmas, and yet when it arrives, it's always a major letdown. That's the problem. It's so sad.
Tom Conroy, quickly. Best and worst part about winter.
Best part about winter, what is it?
Well, I mean, it'd just be the snow, the way you can't drive very well.
Come
That's
on.
the best
No,
thing.
you
What's
get-
the worst thing?
That's not
No, he
the
gets
best.
the most customers here in the winter.
The
Come
best.
on.
No, well, we do because of the basketball. and stuff.
Yeah. Oh, hey.
And-
I thought it was because of the showers.
yeah, in the morning when your car is freezing and you have to go out there. It's like, and there's ice all over it.
hate winter.
That's a
And
good
you're
one.
tempted to just chisel it out, but how many cars over the years have you damaged your own cars because you keep chiseling rather than letting the chemical thing happen?
There's
with
a
the heat?
Western concept called garage. Have you heard of it?
What's the best thing about winter?
Chili.
Basketball, I suppose.
Well, I grew up in the tropics, so I don't like winter at all. The best thing, I guess it's pretty for a very, very short time. And then we have in Lawrence here, we have like grades of like 5 degrees, and you can't get up some of them sometimes because of the black ice and stuff. So I'm
it's
not a
gotta be
big fan
black.
of winter, that's for sure. Jeremy, in England,
it be
do you,
white
do you
ice?
get a lot of snow in England?
So, Evo, who were our sponsors tonight, please?
I frankly didn't communicate with our sales department this time, and I don't have one prepared, but I know that in the past we've been offered sponsorship by Chris Callback. And
Yeah, that
I think
all went a bit west, didn't it?
Yeah, he said that when he gets elected governor, he's going to cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and give us, after giving, a large portion of it to the Koch brothers, he'll give us the remaining $25. But this didn't pan out, didn't work out. He didn't win again. He's kind of a perpetual loser in elections.
I have a question to ask of him. Has he taken those 6 hours of remedial lawyer training yet?
Not yet, but Chris
Then he's in
Callback.
contempt of court again.
We are sponsored today by Chris Callback. He has pledged, he's done something better than sponsorship. He has pledged $1 for each illegal immigrant who voted in the presidential election, because he's the head of the Voter Integrity Commission. And he told me personally that he expects between 3 and 3.5 million illegal immigrants who have voted in the presidential election. So we potentially will gain, because of his pledge, we'll gain about $3 million. Unfortunately, it looks like we're going to get $2 because the commission apparently discovered 2 elderly Republicans who voted by mistake twice.
Want to thank our technical advisor, Dr. Fernando, who hasn't advised for now quite a few. Engineer Eric Holcomb, our producer Neil Rasmussen, and of course the team: Josh, Kathleen, Evo, Lauren Snow, Dr. Orlando, and I'm Jeremy Taylor. Thank you very much indeed for listening.
Oh,